So yeah, I've been involved with Selenium for a while, and I was asked to kind of close out the first day of the conference here. I guess just first, I'm just blown away at how many people are here, how many folks are interested in this crazy browser automation project that a handful of us were goofing around with 7 years ago. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. So just really, really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to doing this, I hope, every year on out from here, because we've clearly reached a critical mass where there are lots of other people in the world that care about this project too. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time just going through and kind of how I got involved in Selenium, and just a tiny bit of history, and then get more into what are some of the challenges that the project faces now that it's getting to this mature, large organization that can actually establish a conference where hundreds of people are showing up, and how you can get involved and help grow it for the next 7 years, and how you can shape the future of that. And then finally kind of finishing up with where I'd like to see it to go, but really ultimately the vision's going to be up to you guys. So I grew up here in the Bay Area. Went to school in San Diego, and then came back and joined a startup. And at the startup, we were working on testing. It was an important goal for the company. Needed lots of automation. This was around 2003, 2004. And I was tasked to build out this testing framework. And I was not a testing guy at all. I've never been a testing guy, so it's a little odd that I've gotten involved in this testing project, and I ended up starting 2 different software companies that were centered around Selenium, and it's just really weird, because I'm one of the worst testers in the world, I think. So more than happy later tonight, if I see you at a bar, please school me on the methodology of testing, because I'm sure I do it all wrong. I missed Adam's presentation, so I'm going to need some additional education. But one of the things I built was this little Excel-based system where you could type in commands like click this, type this value, open this command, and you put it in a little Excel file. And it was really weird. You actually uploaded it to a shared folder, and there was a little daemon process that would grab that file, run the test as declared in this Excel file, highlight the cells green or red, depending on how it went, and then send it back to a different shared file. And the idea was that you could have product managers and business analysts write their tests, throw it up to the system, and get their reports back a few minutes later. The underlying system was HTML unit. That project got started in late 2003, and by 2004, when I was using it, was chugging along, but we were running into a lot of problems. And that was kind of as far as it got. The company itself ended up it's actually still around. I think it's like 3 guys, but didn't really survive past 2004, 2005. And so as I was getting ready for this keynote, I was kind of curious, what was the first thing that I had in my inbox where I mentioned Selenium? How did I get involved in Selenium? And I found the email, and it just kind of made me chuckle. This is what I wrote to someone else after I'd left that company. I said, too bad this didn't exist when we were setting up our automated testing system at Spoke. That was the company I was working for. Similar to the Excel stuff, but it actually uses a real browser. That was a big deal, because we were doing some AJAX stuff, and an HTML unit was giving us some challenges. And you can see the URL there is selenium.thoughtworks.com. And that was in March 2005. So that was really when I first got involved. And that's 6 years for me. The project, as Jason had mentioned, really got kicked off in July of 2004. And so it's really been just coming on 7 years for this project. And I think this is a testament to the longevity and the maturity of the project. So a brief timeline. So Selenium was created at ThoughtWorks by a few of the guys you've seen up here on stage. In November, so around March, I got interested in this project, and by November I said, I think this project needs a bigger community, a little more help. And so as Jason alluded to, founded this organization called OpenQA. It still exists, although it's really centered around Selenium, so there's not too many projects in it today. But OpenQA was a open source organization. The vision behind it was it'd be something like Apache, but for QA projects. And may still go and do something like that. But Selenium was really the first and main project to ever join it. And so that came in November 2005. Shortly thereafter, we used that that kind of umbrella organization to launch Selenium IDE. At the time, there were two different folks competing. There was Shinya Kasatani, was this guy out in Japan who built this thing that was called Selenium Recorder, I think was what it was originally called. And then there was another guy who had a similar project, and we were trying to get them to work together, and then the other guy disappeared. And so then we just renamed it, and voila, we had Selenium IDE. And that was kind of the inflection point. That's where Selenium went from this kind of nice little project that a few folks used to then big growth. And the reason was Selenium IDE. Just show of hands, how many here started with Selenium IDE? Everyone. That's generally how it goes. And so we were really fortunate to get that project to come in. And it was just an outside contributor. It wasn't someone who had been working at ThoughtWorks. It wasn't someone that Jason or I knew. It was this outside guy who liked the project and said, I'm gonna do something interesting. Here's a Firefox plugin. Shortly after that, we decided to split out Selenium from the HTML, what we call Selenium Core in legacy terms, split that out and introduce Selenium Remote Control. And that was really to support a lot of the challenges that Selenium was running into, like cross-site scripting issues, SSL, whatnot. So we put a whole bunch of work into this HTTP proxy that's ungodly and hideous if you've ever looked at the code. But you know, it's there, and it's my unfortunate mark on the project because I still regret most of that code. Shortly after that, Selenium Grid, and then things really just started accelerating. In January 2008, WebDriver, we convinced Simon to join the project, mostly from Jason, and Paul, I think, cornered Simon and didn't let him leave until he said he'd join our project. And right after that, we held, just about 3 years ago, almost to the day, our first kind of mini conference at Google. It was a half-day, kind of 4-hour type of session with maybe 60 people. And so it's just really interesting that for me, I've been at this for 6 years, and 3 years into it, we had a half-day with 60 people, and almost 3 years later, we now have 250 people for 3 days. And so it's just a testament, again, to that growth. Around that same time, at that conference, I put out a call for help. I said, our website is awful. Please help. And there's actually a guy in like Minnesota who was watching online and said, I'll help you out. And that was where the Selenium website today that you know was born. Before that, it was this really ugly thing. Looks a lot more like the OpenQA website. And he just pitched in. We'd never met the guy before, and he said, I'm going to help out. And so I'm hoping the same thing will happen again, that people here and people that are kind of watching and following along online will get inspired and contribute something equally important, because that website was, again, another big growth factor. It helped organize us a little better. It helped get the documentation up and running and just communicated the vision of Selenium a lot better. The weird thing is that it took us till March 2009 to get Selenium 1.0 released, and yet, or May 2009, and then just a few months later, we've had 2.0 alpha coming out. So we were a little slow on the releases. I think you guys will see that we're going to be a lot faster going forward because we've got a much stronger vision for some of the core problems, the really difficult, sticky stuff that involves browser automation. And the biggest challenge we'd run into, as you've heard from some of the other committers, was every time a new browser would come out, we were getting creamed in terms of, oh crap, we can't release because we have to go and support IE7 because IE7 is the new thing. And by the time we got support for IE7 around, IE8 was coming out. And so that was pretty difficult. So we're pretty happy that Simon's really taken on that big challenge and pushing it. And then from there, Water WebDriver, obviously a big milestone in helping coordinate the efforts on those difficult things, and then letting people take the preferred API, but still get the benefit of a single kernel that's just good at automating browsers. And then, of course, just recently we've got the beta out, and we've had 3 beta releases since then. So, that's just a brief kind of history of Selenium and the things we've gone through. And what I'm really looking forward to now that we've got to this level of critical mass, we're apparently just about to overtake Quick Test Pro in the job market for the Fortune 100 companies. I'm really excited what the next 7 years are going to look like and what the timeline will look like at that point and what the conferences will be like, a year or 2 or 3 years from now. I think it's going to surpass all of our wildest imaginations. The ecosystem that's built up around Selenium has been really impressive, and that's been part of why we've grown so well. This is just a selection of some various open source projects. I couldn't find a logo for Capybara. I think someone else had that problem, so they just put some pictures of animals up there. Also couldn't find one for WebRat, but I found this rat on a web, and so that seems to work okay. But Cubic Test, Bromine, WebRat, Cucumber, Water, PHP unit, Selenium Builder, HTML unit, the browser mob proxy that was mentioned. All of these things and more have grown in the open source arena to work with Selenium or build on top of Selenium or augment Selenium. Interestingly enough, Simon was just telling me that there's a crazy circular dependency because we depend on HTML unit as part of WebDriver, and yet now WebDriver's build, or as HTML unit's build now depends back on WebDriver, and they use it actually for compatibility testing. So they'll load up a page in HTML unit, make sure it functionally works a certain way, and then make sure that functionality matches with a real browser. And so we're seeing use of Selenium all over the place in the open source world. And again, that's just been kind of expanding the reach and educating you guys more and more. So I'm sure there's quite a few of you out there that found out about us through one of these projects. You heard about Capybara or WebRat or Water and learned about Selenium along the way. In terms of commercial offerings, that's also been really exciting. There are, I think, 11 products and companies up there, maybe 12 now, that have, the Monetus one's not coming up at all, that have been built out on top of Selenium, and that's been really impressive too, because when there are companies where their full-time job is to work on Selenium, you tend to see the project move much faster. The Google guys, funny enough, they don't even have a product built on top of Selenium that they release like these companies do, but that they are moving at an incredibly fast pace because Google, just like these other companies, is employing at least one, or in the case of Google, I think it's, what do you have now, Simon, like six folks that are full-time on this stuff. It's really impressive the amount of full-time effort that has been put into Selenium. So if you are curious about kind of the commercial ecosystem, I definitely recommend you look at some of these companies. My company's up there for full disclosure. Browser Mob was acquired in July. As an aside, I have to respond now to that load testing question. So, I disagree with Jason. I started this startup called Browser Mob. You can check it out yourself and learn a little more and try it out. But it was basically founded on the premise that you could use Selenium as a load testing tool. And what it really came out to be was an economic exercise in my mind, which was 1,000 browsers. How much does that cost to spin up? Let's say you give every CPU core, or every browser, a full CPU core, and you use the cloud. Well, that's 1,000 CPU cores, and if you look at Amazon, they charge 8.5 cents on the East Coast per hour for that, plus a little bit extra for bandwidth. And if you buy them on the spot market, you can probably get them for 3 or 4 cents. And so you're paying maybe $30 to $60 for an hour of all of that computing time. And absolutely, you could generate that kind of traffic with less resources if it's well-defined and you've put the work into building that Apache Bench script or that JMeter script or that load runner script. But when you're only paying $60 or $50 or $40 an hour, is that the best use of your time? Who here has worked on load runner? We got a few folks, or JMeter or similar types of things. And who here has spent more than a couple days working on one of those scripts? I'm seeing almost the same hands. And who here probably is getting paid more than $30 or $40 or $50 an hour? You start running the math up and you say, well, gee, if you spend 2 or 3 days full time on one of these scripts, maybe it would have been faster to just run that Selenium script. And that was kind of the economic exercise I went through. And it was only based on cloud computing. And so definitely I would say Selenium has its limits. You can't do 100,000 browser tests because Amazon is still governed by the laws of physics, and there's not 100,000 CPUs sitting around. But there are many, many thousands. We're actually running more than 1 million water and Selenium tests every day with our business. And it's pretty impressive. We do tests for Groupon was here. We helped them with their Super Bowl commercial. Did a mixture of real browser tests as well as raw HTTP traffic. And in that particular test, we ended up transferring, I think, over 22 terabytes in 1 hour. And the total cost to them was, I think, a few $1,000s. And it all just comes from the economics of the cloud. But the more important thing is that these companies, Dynatrace, Element 34, consulting company, Push to Test, Mogo Test, all of these companies are using Selenium or selling Selenium services, which only furthers the Selenium ecosystem, just like those open source projects. And so that's been a really exciting development, because just a few years ago, none of these guys existed. And that's just a big thing. Before I get into some of our dirty laundry that I want to cover, I just have to get this out because I don't know if they've all been mentioned, but these are like my 3 or 4 like personal pet peeves that I want everyone to know. So anyone who's here, hopefully at a minimum you walk away with this. It's 1 slide. Firebug. If you don't use the $ or $$ or $X and CD functions, learn them and start using them. They are fantastic. These are little functions, little commands that you can use in the Firebug command line that will make your life infinitely easier. $ will look up an element by ID. $$ will look it up by a CSS style sheet rule. $X will execute an XPath expression. And CD will actually change the context of the window so you can go in and execute those same functions in a frame or a pop-up window or something like that. So as you're working on your tests, use those because they will be your best friend. CSS locators, I think you've probably already heard it a few times, but use them. They are just faster in general, and they're going to encourage kind of better tests, they're better applications. So if you don't know CSS and you don't know CSS locators, get a book and read about it a little more because it'll make your life a lot easier. That said, if you have to use XPath, learn the more advanced XPath that's out there. So this third bullet point is looking for a hyperlink where the href attribute contains some URL. And that's pretty handy because you can match against partial URLs. You don't have to try to match against a full URL destination that might be staging or might be production or might have some crazy characters that change every time in it. So you can match against partial things with that contains function. And then lastly, this is one that I rarely ever see used, but can be really handy in a pinch. If you haven't ever had a need for it, you probably will at some point, to basically get the nth element from an XPath expression. And a lot of people don't know how to do it. You have to wrap the parentheses around the whole thing and then use the index array. So you can't just say //a, class equals foo, and then another set of brackets 2. That's not how XPath works. So you just wrap it, and that'll get you the second of the returned list, and that's really handy. So sorry, this was my soapbox opportunity. I had to get that out there. So on to a couple things I wanted to cover. Our dirty laundry. When you get up here, you see committers are kind of disagreeing with each other, and it's healthy and it's fun. But the reality is that the project, as successful as it's been in the last 7 years, and as great it is that you're all here, still lacks some clarity. I'm sure there's many of you in the room that are saying, when should I use IDE or remote control or WebDriver? What is Selenium 1? What is this Selenese thing I hear about? And what the heck is Bromine and Cubic Test and Selenium on Rails? And why are those on the website? And what do they do for me? And how do I upgrade? The reality is that we've been somewhat poor at communicating that. And we can use your help by asking these questions, by cornering us in a room at this conference and pinning us down and saying, this is how I interpret it. Because we sometimes get lost in the world of Selenium. We've got this little chat room and community and forums where Adam and Kevin and Simon and Jason are all joking around, and we've all got slightly different philosophies, but sometimes we do forget that there's hundreds and thousands of you guys out there that sometimes might show up at our website and say, what the heck is going on? And so, I wanted to make it clear that we understand that we can do better there, and we depend on you guys to help us make it better. Documentation has been a huge challenge for us. We have an excellent team of dedicated volunteers that do documentation. I think at last count we had over 20 contributions from 20 different people, none of which are core committers on the individual projects, but that are helping out with documentation. So we're certainly very grateful for all of their efforts, and I'm sure a lot of you have gone through the documentation and found it helpful. Unfortunately, we still have room to do better. One, the project clarity issue that I just mentioned. As long as that's kind of up in the air, it will be hard for the documentation team to clearly help you figure out how you should use Selenium to its maximum potential. The second one is that our searchability is somewhat poor. So I was just being told earlier today, if you search for Selenium locator strategy, you actually get, as the first hit on Google, some doc that's from like 0.8.3 or something like that. We've got old docs scattered around that are still being indexed by Google, and we need to do better to kind of clean that up. On top of that, when you run into an error, when you get an internal error or there's some problem, a locator's not found, we don't do a great job of telling you what to do with that and how to respond to it. The few times that we do, where we point you to a link, I think in some of our releases, we still point you to our old online forums that we don't even use anymore. So we clearly have to do better there, pointing you off to some forums when we migrated off of that 1 or 2 years ago. So that's another area we're aware of, but haven't done, I think, a good enough job. When it comes trying, to contributions as well, to encourage other people to contribute to the project, we don't make that incredibly easy either. Who here, who's not a committer, has tried building Selenium? Okay, 4 people, 5 people. We would like for that to be many, many times more this time next year, if you can come back to the conference that we hold next year. We want to encourage everybody to try to build it and contribute back to the project. If you've tried building it, the 5 people that have, I imagine you had some challenges because, hell, I'm a contributor and I have challenges running that build. So we want to do better there. It is a very, very complex project. It's trying to automate many browsers, many versions on many operating systems. And so the build's never going to be trivial, but we want to make it as simple as possible. And we do a pretty good job in some ways. We auto-include that discussion about Git. We auto-include artifacts, say, for Windows. So if you're on a Mac, we'll skip the Windows part of the build, and we'll just use the most recent binary that was built on a Windows machine. And so that makes it a little easier. But I think the hardest part is that the contributors themselves are moving so quickly. And so we need to do a better job of defining the roadmap and showing how we're moving against that roadmap and what's changing and what's expected in Selenium 2 Beta 4 and Selenium 2 Beta 5. Because for me, at least, when I get involved, I mean, I'm kind of old and a little creaky when I get into the code base. It takes me so long now because they move so quickly. I might need several days just to get caught up and to see what's new. Simon was just giving me an overview on some of the really cool stuff they're doing inside of WebDriver, and so if it's taking me several days to get caught up, that's going to be just a higher barrier to entry for anyone else as well. And then lastly, we've got kind of a split opinion on Selenium IDE. I think it's pretty obvious that the developers, Adam was up here saying himself, get off of Selenium IDE. But that doesn't mean that we all want to actually kill that project. We all agree that writing your tests in Java or Ruby or Python or Perl is a better way to go in the long term, but we don't agree on what we want to do with Selenium IDE and how to bring users over from Selenium IDE into more advanced concepts and more complex projects for managing your automated tests. And so we really need you guys to get involved and help us understand how you use Selenium. Because our core committing group are all hardcore programmers. You know, these guys are out down there in the weeds of COM and compiling, you know, beta builds and alpha builds of Chrome, not something the average tester is getting involved in. And so sometimes we lose sight of what you guys need as the community. Just curious, show of hands. So I know almost everybody here said they got started with Selenium IDE. How many of you still regularly use it? Yeah. So we've got 3, I think, and someone clapping. Was that Simon? So we've really focused all of our effort on trying to shift you over, but we don't do a great job of walking you through it. So I'd like to see some improvement there. So how do you get involved? This is the extent of my Photoshop. We need you guys to help and get Selenium to be much, much better than it is already. And we're so proud of what we've done, but we think you can help us make it even better. So number 1 is, you know, get involved on the Selenium users mailing list. I would imagine a lot of you already are if you're coming to a conference, but if you're not, you know, please subscribe, even if it's not getting the email blast, because it's a pretty busy mailing list. But just check it out, you know, once a week, and if you can, help answer some questions, because there's still a lot of newbie questions that are out there that the development team pretty much has no time to respond to. I don't think any of the core committers anymore are actively watching the Selenium users group, for better or for worse. Simon says he is. He just doesn't answer the questions. All right. So that's definitely one you can do. Second one, related, get on the developers list. The developers list doesn't mean you have to be a developer. It's open source. It's free for everyone. Anybody can sign up, can search the archives. Everything's public. So jump on there, and that's going to be your best engagement to the developers. Now, it doesn't mean abuse it or take advantage of it. Don't go there to ask user questions. But if you do have, you know, a valid criticism, hey, dummies, you haven't updated the website in 3 weeks and you already had 2 new versions of Selenium, you know, go update that. That's a valid thing to bring up on the Selenium developers mailing list. So join that. You'll see there's a very active discussion going on pretty much every day. And you can get involved and help control and direct some of the future of Selenium. So, you know, I definitely encourage you to go there. Likewise, hang out on IRC. There's pretty much all of the major contributors to Selenium are on irc.freenode.net under the Selenium channel. So join, introduce yourself, say hi, and join the conversation. That's a lot of decisions are getting made in real time over chat. So definitely consider that as well. Build the code. We know that the build can be a little daunting at first, but if you can build the code, then you can also send us patches. And that's really important. It's one thing to open a bug saying, this doesn't work. It's another to say, this doesn't work, and here's the fix. You're much more likely to get your problem solved if you've solved it for us already. We have a ton of things that we're keeping track of. As the browser vendors kind of take on more of that automation themselves, like Opera has, maybe we'll be able to come up and breathe a little bit more. But in the meantime, it's very difficult for these bugs to bubble up to the top unless they have a patch. And so, you know, keep that in mind. And if you can't do a patch, at least, you know, open. We need to test in an automated way on lots of different platforms. We have an Xserve that we're running today. Probably, well, we can't buy any more Xserves because they're gone, but we'll probably have to buy some more hardware soon. And we've got budget for running Amazon machines. We use a Bamboo continuous integration system. But I think, as you all know, having the hardware and having the software is only 1/10 of the battle. We need people to watch those builds and respond to them and fix them when they get stuck, and upgrade the operating systems when they need to get patched. And we really only have, you know, do we even have one person doing that? Is that Adam? Sort of. He shrugs. Okay, we've got a couple folks that pitch in part-time, but we need a lot of people to pitch in part-time. So if you've got experience running a continuous integration system, you want to help with that, you don't need to know how to program core WebDriver stuff. You can still contribute a ton of value because we won't put a release out unless our tests are passing. And if our CI system isn't even running, we certainly aren't getting them to pass. So what does the future of Selenium look like? Well, the reality is that no one really knows because it's an open source project and it's entirely based on merit and contribution, of which if you look at my commit history, I have very little in the recent years. But I'm still going to tell you my version of what I think the future should look like. Simon tomorrow, I think, is going to share his version of what the future should look like. So generally, we're all in agreement that in the future, we want to make it very clear via documentation, via the website, via training and education, that Selenium is not a project that you download. You don't run Selenium. You don't download Selenium. Selenium is just an umbrella, much in the same way that maybe Apache is an umbrella of many projects. Selenium is an umbrella of many core projects related to Selenium, the browser automation technology. And that I would like for it to be clear that Selenium IDE is the recording tool for it. The language, I think we can clean up a little bit. The fact that we have type and type keys is pretty obnoxious. The fact that we have click and click at is really obnoxious. But the general concept of a recorder that still uses that 3-column structure, I think makes a lot of sense because it's the easiest way for you to get started. I believe firmly that if Selenium IDE didn't exist, we wouldn't have this conference today. It wouldn't have existed. There'd be 1/10 of you guys using Selenium. Selenium IDE really, if you go back and you look at the analytics charts and the website traffic that I've been watching over the last 6 years, it really was a major inflection point. So I want to make sure that project stays around so that we can bring on new users as they realize that Selenium is a fantastic browser testing tool. Selenium WebDriver, I want to be known as Selenium WebDriver and prefixed with the word Selenium, so it's very clear it is the web driver for Selenium projects. And so there's really nothing too surprising there. We might even have called it Selenium Core if it weren't for the fact that there's already a very legacy project called Selenium Core. But that's really what it is. It's the core engine for all of these other projects, including, in the future, I hope, Selenium IDE, meaning we would share the Firefox core engine that WebDriver uses today inside of Selenium IDE so that we know it's really running on the exact same automation engine. I also think that Selenium Remote Control should disappear completely. And some people may be raising their eyebrows a little bit because I imagine there's a lot of Selenium RC users out there. But really, it's just, I want it to be a grid of one and make it easy for you to start with one node and add more nodes as time goes on. It's not that you need to switch from using remote control and then say, well, now I want to use grid. Because, really, what is the difference? Remote control is a grid of one. And so I'd like for Selenium Grid to really be seen as the remote automation system for all of Selenium, and WebDriver to be seen as the one that's for local automation. And then lastly, I think there's something new, something that's missing. And so I just want to spell this out before I call it a day and we all go on to enjoy our evening. So we've established pretty much that everybody starts with Selenium IDE. And almost everybody graduates to WebDriver and Selenium Remote Control and Selenium Grid, and that works great. The thing is, though, is that we still see on the mailing lists and on people that we talk to, there's a lot of folks that end up using not that project, but end up using sort of this other alternative. They couldn't make the jump to running Java and Ruby and Python. They still felt a lot more comfortable in that grid or table style language where you're saying, type this value, this field, into this field, this value. And we've well established today that only can take you so far until you really have to pick up a programming language and move over. But I feel like there's something missing that we could, I think somewhere around half our community on the mailing list at least would benefit from something else. So what they do today is they get lost in, just reading this out, get lost in limbo land trying to run HTML suite. Who here knows what HTML suite is? Yeah, a few of you. I'm pretty impressed. I don't even remember when that thing got built. I may have written it myself. I don't know. HTML suite, for those that don't know, is an option in Selenium Remote Control. Selenium Remote Control is right. It's like the thing that responds to Java and Ruby commands remotely over a wire protocol. But who knew that it also has an option, a little command line option that you can say -HTML suite and read this other suite of HTML files that are generated by Selenium IDE, read that in, run it locally, and then spit back out a report. It's kind of like not at all what it was built to do, but hey, it's there. And then there's other folks who use, who actually launch Firefox pointing as a starting URL to a special Chrome URL, and there's this little test runner inside of Selenium IDE, and that'll kick off a test suite. And so, it's tough because we really don't cater to those users at all. We don't, most of the developers didn't even know it was there, or if they did, they sort of dismissed it and said, well, you should write your test in Java, duh. And so that's been kind of a pain point for our users. So I would love to see personally, a year from now or 2 years from now, a project that replaces that. I had to use the little Keynote things at some point. There you go. Replaces it with some sort of new project that actually gives those users a migration path other than, hey, too bad, and we're just going to shrug and, go walk the other way. I think that we could have a project, for example, that is a web-based portal, a UI where you can actually upload some of these Selenium tests and store them, a repository that holds those test cases and lets you actually run them from that environment, and maybe it'd kick off to Sauce Labs or kick off to Selenium Grid. And so the browser automation still happens through Grid environments or remote control and WebDriver, but the tests themselves, the repository, is actually stored in this web-based interface, and the test results are archived for historical purposes, and that it's something that anybody in your company could go check out. I think there's a lot of power to that. And yet it still stay at that simplicity that's the early Selenium IDE users have. At some point, they would still probably want to migrate over to a full-fledged programming language that uses continuous integration and JBehave or PHP unit or any of the other automation languages that WebDriver and Grid natively support. But I think there's something there that Selenium could do to really help our community out. But that's just what I think can happen. None of it's going to happen unless I do it or one of you guys does it. And so there's all sorts of different ideas that are out there. And I really want to just challenge you guys as you leave tonight to say, how do you think Selenium should evolve? Because really the future is in your hands. And what's your version of the future look like? And share it with us, share it with your colleagues, and let us know if we're doing it right or we're doing it wrong. So I really appreciate you guys coming here. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great evening, and we see you tomorrow.